Thank you for joining the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast with your host, Clayton Craddock.
Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. Today, my guest is Greg Landes. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Thank you for including me. I feel fortunate and grateful to be spoken to with in the same arena with all the wonderful musicians you've spoken with. So thank you.
I see in the background, for those that are looking on YouTube, there's a few posters in the back. Yes. One of them being Altar Boys. And
yes, you
have that up there because we connected through that show back in 2008, 2009, 2007. I actually did the show from 2005 to 2009. And Greg was the drummer who played the closing night show.
I did. It was a wonderful experience. And I put the poster up because, yes, that is our original connection. And you were a wonderful colleague, a welcoming friend in that situation. And that experience as a sub was wonderful. I really appreciated all of that. And I did play the last show with Gary Adler at the keyboard. And it was remarkable, packed house of everyone who had been involved with the show, and a very special event.
From what I understand, you are from Irvington, New York.
I did. I grew up in the beautiful town right on the Hudson of Irvington, which is in Westchester County, just a train ride away from New York City. I used to, at 12 years old, this is remarkable in this day and age, take the train into New York by myself to study with a wonderful teacher named Eric Brewster, who was a student at Juilliard at the time. But yeah, Irvington was a beautiful place to grow up. Good music program. And started playing very young in a band with my brother, who is 6 years older. He's a pianist, and we can talk about the duo that he and I have together now later in the podcast. But it was a very happy time growing up in Irvington, and in every way, and musically certainly very rich. My dad was a pianist. He actually is a school teacher, science, chemistry, and biology teacher, but a really fantastic jazz pianist. And my brother went that direction. I went into drums as a very young. I was probably about 6 or 7 when I started. Yeah, and I always kind of knew that that's what I wanted to do. But that all started in Irvington. My influence was my father and my brother, certainly, who were both pianists. But for some reason, I gravitated towards the drums. And my father was very supportive. When it came to music, he was very encouraging with me as a young man. It's sort of the direction I went. And I had a real natural affinity for it. I played trombone for a little while. I wanted to be a trumpet player too, but drums is where my heart was.
So you always knew you wanted to be a drummer?
I really did always know that music was going to be my life. Yeah. From a pretty early age. There was a very defining moment in high school where I said that, yeah, this is it. But even at a young age, yeah, music was something I really naturally gravitated towards.
Were there any drummers that you saw on TV that you said, okay, that is cool and I want to be like that person?
That's a great question. So there were drummers that played with my brother who was in high school. By the time I was in middle school, my brother was in high school playing with bands. Some of those drummers were inspiring to me, my teachers. And my brother was a very educational person in that he exposed me to some really great music. And in those days, it was Chick Corea, Return of Forever, Genesis, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, all of those fantastic rock fusion bands. So Phil Collins, the drummer for Blood, Sweat, and Tears, whose name is escaping me right now, Chicago. All of those guys were very inspiring. It's sort of the music itself inspired me as a drummer.
In Irvington, was it a situation where you did marching band, or or did you leave Irvington during middle school, high school?
I did. So I finished middle school and then headed off to California. But no, so there was a band program in the middle school, fairly, modest. No, there was no marching band. It was as the town was not exactly, filled with thousands of kids to fill those positions. So the programs were strong but modest. And middle school was band predominantly, but I started playing drum set very early, and did all the drum set duties and other things in middle school.
Since you grew up playing like fusion rock type of things, did you have a double bass kit with 10, 12, 14, 16, 18?
Yeah, no. And the drum kits were modest as well. No double bass playing, but definitely, I'm trying to think. I think Rogers was my first drum set. Was a black laminated Rogers set that one of my teachers had sold to us. And I loved that drum set. No double bass playing until I hit college, actually. So.
Oh, really? You played double bass in college?
Yeah, well, I certainly experimented and wanted to become more proficient with that stuff, especially on the fusion end of things.
Were you playing, what's that song by Billy Cobham that has the double bass shuffle?
Right, that actually, and then Simon Phillips, because it was a Jeff Beck tune that sort of,
Quantum
was a tribute to him. It was off the Spectrum album. I remember that.
Quadrant 4, I think that's what it's called.
Right. Yeah, no, I wish, but there is I did a great tribute to Mahavishnu Orchestra. It's on YouTube. We did it at the Thalia at Symphony Space. It's my brother, Jeff Carney, who you may know, bass player, Broadway bass player. We did a tribute. It is up on YouTube. We did the one that opens with the really fast single stroke roll. It's up on YouTube, so it's there. It's the Pit Stop Players, which is a group that Josh Rosenblum runs. It's all Broadway musicians that play with that group. Yeah, but definitely Billy Cobham, absolute influence as a young kid. Lenny White, all those guys were monsters, in my mind.
So you were playing drum set. Was there something that introduced you to the world of percussion?
So it wasn't until I got to California, to San Francisco, that started. And I started studying with an amazing player named Glenn Ryan. So Glenn Ryan came to New York and took Broadway by storm. He actually played Guys and Dolls, which was a humongous hit. He did Gypsy. He did Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. He did Putnam Spelling Bee. Those were all his shows. And he was my teacher when I was 14 years old out in California, in the beautiful city of San Francisco. So he exposed me to more percussion playing. Once to the San Francisco Conservatory pre-college. And then I joined the Oakland Youth Symphony. And that was where I went, this is what I want to do. And it was always a combination of drum set and percussion. I never wanted to forsake drum set playing, for being strictly a classical percussionist. And what's interesting, when I got to Juilliard, when I came back for my master's, I was really the only drum set player at the time. They now have a phenomenal jazz program at the school. But at the time, in 87 through 89, I was the only cat playing drums.
Wow.
And I would go into Buster Bailey's studio and put on Earth, Wind and Fire or John Scofield, because I love Dennis Chambers, and just go crazy. But I was like the only guy doing that at the time. Yeah, it has always been both of those worlds for me, which is why I'm so happy doing what I've been doing.
You got introduced to percussion through your experiences out in San Francisco, the Oakland Youth Symphony, and you went to undergrad at San Francisco State?
I did. I started at San Francisco State. I did 2 years at San Francisco State, and then the conservatory, where I studied with a teacher named Barry Jakowski, who is now strictly a conductor, but a phenomenal percussionist and timpanist. He played with the San Francisco Symphony. And I was very fortunate as a student to be with him. I learned a lot. He was a more stick than a carrot teacher, meaning wasn't supportive emotionally, but what you got from him technically and musically was bottomless. I mean, he was a phenomenal musician, still is, and a great teacher in that respect. And that's, yes, but even as 15-year-old player, I was started to play timpani and mallets, and was playing amazing repertoire with the Oakland Youth Symphony, including The Rite of Spring. That was the very first piece I ever played as a young man. I don't know if you know the Rite of Spring, Igor Stravinsky. It is one of the most difficult, iconic classical pieces to play. And that was on stage playing that piece. I went, yep, this is what I want to do with my life. That was a very defining moment, that particular piece and concert, in really solidifying my desire to be a musician.
When a drummer is growing up and they have a passion for something, you usually have a drum set at home, and you come home after school and you practice. Did you have percussion instruments at home, like what I see behind you now?
Yes.
Timpani and xylophone and marimba?
No, I didn't. I my mother was working for IBM at the time, and one of her coworkers had a little 2.5 octave Keelon xylophone that he loaned to me that ended up being mine. I had a tiny little 2.5 octave xylophone. That's all I had. So what I would do is go to the high school and beg to be let into the band room after school, before school, so I could get on the timpani, so that I could get on the larger mallet instruments. No, I in fact had very little at home. And I made friends with my band teachers, and was able to get in and do that. And then I got into the conservatory. They let me practice there a little bit too. But no, I wish that these instruments came much later in life for me. Even after Juilliard, after I graduated with my master's. I always had studios to go to generally, or schools that I was at that furnished equipment. Now, yes, it is all in my home. My very understanding wife, who has been incredibly supportive as far as our homes being run over by, taken over by large instrument setups.
So you got your undergrad and you wanted to go to Juilliard. Why would you want to get a master's degree?
That's an excellent question, too. And I actually auditioned for Juilliard once for my undergrad. I did not get in. I ended up at the conservatory, and I wasn't ready. It actually, the timing, really, there is a reason why things happen in the time that they do. And for my master's degree, my audition was amazing, mostly because of the teacher who was there. His name was Roland Koloff. He was a timpanist for the New York Philharmonic for 30 plus years, maybe more than that. He made my audition so comfortable. I was one of 2 people to get in. There were probably close to 20 at that March audition. And another colleague, Paul Hostetter, who's another fine percussionist and conductor, he and I got in. I came back because I wanted to continue my studies. In those days, we all wanted to win orchestral jobs. So being at Juilliard, which is one of the best classical schools in the world, there are many, but it is one of the best. I wanted to be in New York, and I wanted to be at one of the best schools with a phenomenal teacher. And so that's why I wanted to continue on with that. And that's why I came back to New York. Having been from New York too, I felt comfortable coming back here. That was my goal, was to win an orchestral job.
On Broadway, usually at one time when Broadway is up and running at full capacity, there are 20 musicals. That means there are 20 drummers out of all of the drummers on the planet that are playing Broadway, which I think about when I was doing it. I was like, man, I'm one of the 20 people in the entire
Absolutely.
planet that have a job playing Broadway. And then you have 5 subs. So there are about 100 drummers that are doing what we do. Those who are percussionists, and especially those who play for symphony orchestras, there's only one, and there's what, 12 or 15 symphony orchestras in the United States?
Yes, it's a remarkably competitive. And now, sadly, I think that the market is shrinking. A lot of very good regional orchestras are not managing to stay afloat, which makes the number of jobs and openings much smaller pool for people. Getting an orchestral job these days is really, really difficult, extremely difficult. I was very lucky. Before I graduated Juilliard, I won the timpani position with the new Haven Symphony, a very, very, very good regional group. I was also playing Broadway. I had a Broadway show before I graduated. I was very, very lucky before I got out of school. But yes, to answer your question, it is extremely difficult to win a orchestral job these days. A colleague of mine named Patty Nemi, we went to school together at Juilliard. She wrote a great book called Sticking It Out. I think it's called Sticking It Out. It's her journey to win the New World Symphony percussion spot, and then she won the San Francisco Opera position, which is a fantastic group. The book talks about everything, her Juilliard experience, and her road to winning those auditions. And it's a great read, and people who are not familiar with the orchestral world might find it really interesting. So shout out to Patty, who's a great player too. Broadway certainly, it has grown way more competitive than it was when I came in the early days that I was playing. So you are correct in saying to marvel at, yes, the gratitude we should all have to be able to do that job at such a high level and in such a remarkably gifted arena at the highest level.
While at Juilliard, before you graduated, you had a Broadway show that you were on?
Well, the first show I ever subbed was Gypsy. And it was that show won many Tonys that year. Actually, Glenn, the teacher I had spoken to you about, Glenn Ryan was the drummer on the show, and he recommended me to someone named Bruce Doctor. Bruce Doctor's now playing New York, New York. Bruce has been around for many years and done a number of very high profile shows. Right now, he's on a real big one, New York, New York. But Bruce brought me in. Eric Stern was the conductor on that. Eric is a brilliant musician as well. And that was my first experience. That was my first year at Juilliard. Yeah, I wasn't even into my second year, and I had started subbing Broadway. And that was really exciting. That was also a very difficult book. In the days where we didn't have monitors, that little mirror, like the conductor when I played the xylophone was over there. Those were the days. So those were incredible experiences for me to start my career in theater.
So did you see Broadway as another thing that you wanted to explore, or were you really focused on the symphonic route?
No, I definitely was very excited about doing everything. In those days, the freelance scene, that's the way it was. You played, some of my colleagues were playing with American Symphony already, which is one of the best orchestras in New York at the moment under the New York Philharmonic. And theater was another very exciting option. I was always excited about it. Never felt, that it took the backseat to my classical studies.
What was the second thing that you worked on, and did those experiences lead you into your first Broadway chair?
Right. So I was also doing an off-Broadway show called Falsetto Land. Michael Starobin was the pianist and orchestrator, and you probably know Michael. He's Tony-winning orchestrator. He did Next to Normal. He did Sunday in the Park with George. So he's been one of Sondheim's big collaborators. He was a very influential person for me. But I started playing this off-Broadway show called Falsetto Land, which was a sort of a three-part trilogy that ended up being falsettos on Broadway. And falsettos won the Tony Award for Best Book and Best Musical. Best Book and Best Music. It did not win Best Musical. Crazy for You won that year. That was my first Broadway chair. That was a multiple percussion drum set book, and probably one of the first to ever be a multiple book. And so that Falsetto Land off Broadway, I did Guys and Dolls for Glenn. That was a huge drum book. That was the run that had Nathan Lane and Faith Prince, and it's the album that everyone goes to listen to that show. I did Funny Thing happened on the way to the Forum. Many other shows as a sub that informed my experience going into my own chair for falsettos.
Falsettos. Describe the setup that you had, if you remember.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it was full drum set. But we had mallets, xylophone, pit xylophone, and glockenspiel to the left. And so you would be, and it was funny, it was in the days before the Miller machine. And so triangle beater in the mouth, xylophone mallets in the hand, playing with your feet. So sometimes you'd be keeping time with your feet while you were playing mallet licks to the left, either xylophone or bells. Small percussion, but that was the extent. It wasn't a massively, huge setup or anything, but it was tricky. And I had to be very careful with finding subs for that show. They had to be people who were proficient in both worlds and comfortable with that kind of choreography, getting around with everything, and it was very exposed. It was only 4 people in the band, so there was no hiding. Yeah. And we were on stage, so
wait, 4 people in the band on Broadway?
On Broadway. Yeah, this was I don't know how they worked that out with the union, but we were at the Golden Theater, which may be the minimum there.
Okay.
Was slightly smaller, but then we were 4 at that. But it was big keyboard book, synth, woodwind, huge woodwind doubling book, and a multiple percussion book.
How long did it last?
That show lasted close to 2 years, I want to say. So it was not a super long run. I felt grateful for every moment of it. Something happened at the end of that run where I was not able to finish it out. I ended up having to miss the last 6 weeks of that show. But that show did run for, I think, a good year and a half. But I had such a great time on that show. And it was so special to me and everybody involved with it.
Falsettos, that ended. Did you decide to pursue other Broadway opportunities, or you just, whatever would come your way, you were like,
Right.
Okay, Broadway, classical? Did you do any jazz or fusion stuff? Were you in bands?
Right.
Did you do any other drum set playing in clubs? Like, what was your
all excellent questions, and I did very heavily pursue more Broadway, and I would make the phone calls before we had emails and things like that, or texts, and would definitely made a great effort to try to get myself into subbing more so that I could pick up other shows that would be mine. I was still playing with the New Haven Symphony. I didn't play a lot of jazz stuff. I did a lot of cabaret playing as a drummer for many years, and still am doing that. And I love doing that, working with singers and songwriters. We all do that. But no, I worked very hard to make connections with other players who I didn't know. Some of those worked out beautifully, guys that we didn't know each other at all till I came into the pit to meet them, where I ended up subbing, for long periods of time on shows. Mark Belair and I did not know each other. He was at Les Mis, the original run of Les Mis. I ended up playing that show with Bill Lanham for a good 3 to 4 years as a sub. And Mark and I did not know each other prior to my reaching out to him. I was very, very motivated to do everything.
If somebody wants to do what you did and try to connect with people, what do you recommend that they do?
It's a really good question now, Clayton. I think people need to be extremely thoughtful, extremely careful in how they approach people who hold chairs, respectful. But I don't think people should be scared away from reaching out. And I think, as I've heard you discuss with a lot of our colleagues, we're all nice people. We're good people. We enjoy having people come into the pit, even if it's just to listen. And there are many instances where I never got to sub a show, where I just went and listened, paid my respect, heard a great player connected just on a personal level. So I'd say don't be discouraged in any way, shape, or form, but you just need to be real thoughtful about how you go about it. And that would be my advice at this point.
You subbed on 30 Broadway shows about?
Yeah, I have all the books in my library over here. I did actually count them once, and I've subbed on a lot of shows over the many years that I've been doing this.
All right, name 10 of them.
Name 10 of them. Okay. So your show, for one, Altar Boys.
Okay.
I subbed on Wicked. I did sub on In the Heights for a short time. I did Crazy for You. I did Guys and Dolls. I did Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. I've done Newsies. I did Avenue Q recently for Joe Horachevsky. I worked with Paul Gimignani on a lot of his shows for Thad Wheeler as a percussion sub. I did Ragtime, both books on Ragtime, drum and percussion. Those are some of them.
That's incredible, man.
Yeah, and they were all remarkably great learning experiences in many ways, not just musically.
So tell me about those two shows to your left. There's three posters to your left.
Right.
I can't read what they are.
That's okay. I wish I should bring them more closer to the camera. The one that is very special is called Putting It Together. That was a show that was all Stephen Sondheim music. And actually, this was off-Broadway for Manhattan Theater Club. The star of the show was Julie Andrews. And that was also a small group. The pianist MD on that was Scott Frankel. Scott Frankel went on to write Grey Gardens and War Paint. Those are two huge Broadway shows. But Scott was a remarkably gifted pianist and musical director. But I remember rehearsal day. That was also a multiple book. I was using Mallet Cat for the first time in my life. So it was full drum set, but it had timpani and mallets, and there was no room for any of those acoustic instruments. So everything except for the bells was put on the Mallet Cat. So into Carol's studio walks Chris Walker, the orchestrator. Behind him comes Julie Andrews. I'm now starting to get very nervous. And in behind Julie Andrews comes Stephen Sondheim.
Oh, man.
So here I am. There's four of us in the band, Scott, myself. We had another synth player and a bass player. And that was a remarkable experience for me. Very challenging show, very difficult, great album that we did that came out that, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Sony Classics that did that album. For us, and we brought in Glenn Ryan. That name comes back again to play acoustic percussion on that. So instead of having the Mallet Cat, we had real instruments. So that's the Putting It Together poster. I had later experiences with Mr. Sondheim on Pacific Overtures and some other shows that I did. He was a truly, genuinely kind, caring person. And all of my interactions with him were so comfortable. He really was a sweet man. The poster next to that is Curtains. That is a Kander and Ebb show that David Hyde Pierce won the Tony for. I played percussion on that show. David Loud, who is now gone. David is not conducting anymore, but David is a very well-known musical supervisor. He's also teaching at Manhattan School. He's doing all of the musical theater at Manhattan School. David brought me in. Bruce Doctor was the drummer on that show, and I got the percussion book. The book was incredibly challenging. All acoustic instruments, some great mallet stuff, some great timpani playing. And that was a show that every time I played, I was grateful for. And gave my gratitude before every show.
What was your favorite musical to play and why?
The one that was the most challenging, I know that's not the question, was In the Heights. And that was, the same creative team did Hamilton. So it's Lin-Manuel and Alex Lacamoire, Andres Ferrero at the drums. That show was probably the hardest thing drum set wise I've ever played. And,
why is that?
Not only the energy that Andres brings to the book, but the sheer variety of styles that you have to be able to play. And that show goes in and out. I think I've heard other people discuss this on your podcast. Perhaps you could be playing a reggae influence thing right into a funk thing, right into an Afro-Cuban thing, right into, I mean, just it went boom, 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 boom. And you had to like just be there, and switch gears so quickly that it was an incredibly challenging book. To play a setup alone. He had a remote bass drum that you had to sort of reach over with your foot underneath to get to the pedal. He had timbales and all kinds of stuff, not to mention the two percussion books on that show. But that was a great learning experience for me. And so in that sense, one of my favorite. Wicked was another show that I really, really enjoyed playing. Percussion-wise, Crazy for You. Just because the music was Gershwin was remarkable, and they all have a special place in my heart. But as far as sheer the challenge of it, the climbing the mountain, those are a few of them.
Was it a challenge to go from playing acoustic percussion instruments to playing a mallet cat?
The hardest thing for me was programming that. And I actually got help programming that. Playing it, yes, there's the sensitivity has changed over the years. I think those instruments have become way more sensitive. But yeah, there was always a challenge to find some kind of nuance, as I'm sure you knew on Altar Boys with electronic instruments. For me, I've been lucky, predominantly been able to play acoustic. Some composers and writers insist that it be like John Kander. He loves marimba. We had a 4-octave marimba for curtains. Some composers insist that it be an acoustic instrument. I think we all need to have comfort with electronics, and I think I've become more comfortable. I think the hardest part is just programming them. Playing, of course, you don't want to get tendonitis playing on some of the instruments because you tend to overplay and hit too hard. But I think knowledge of programming is where I think we all need to focus as far as making that adjustment.
I just find it incredible that you've worked with the New Jersey Symphony, Garden State Philharmonic, Novus, New York, the New Haven Symphony, the American Symphony Orchestra, New York Chorale Society, yes, Brooklyn Philharmonic, Princeton Symphony, Albany Symphony, Little Orchestra Society of New York, Greenwich, Stamford, and Westchester Symphonies, Masterwork Chorale Orchestra, New Jersey Wind Symphony, and the Goldman Band.
So, that's my resume. And so everything gets piled in there, of course. And I have played with all of those groups. And that's what we do. We as musicians, period. And some of us write or more, localized into playing drum set or percussion. For me, it was always the wide gambit of different types of styles and arenas, and that's what made it so much fun for me to do that. I grew to love the diversity of what I was doing, and so getting having to just do one thing all the time didn't interest me as much as jumping from playing drum set on Wicked or another show or Guys and Dolls, and then running to New Haven or one of the other orchestras and playing principal timpani for a Beethoven 7 Symphony or a Beethoven 9 or a Messiah, which I've done many, 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 many times.
Switching back to Broadway, when I was subbing for Bill Lanham at Cats and even at Evita, I noticed Christian Blodgett,
yes,
the conductor, and William, I forgot his last name, he was associate conductor. They conduct in a very classical style, probably because of the type of music that you're playing.
Absolutely.
And I had to get used to it when I was watching David Roth, the percussionist, yes, at Cats. I would pay attention to when he would hit the triangle, because I couldn't watch the conductor. If I was watching the conductor, I'd be early.
Yes.
And there's a specific way of the orchestra working together as it relates to what the conductor is doing. Now, I don't know if you can explain, because this might help me.
Yes.
And it might help others try to interpret the way that a conductor conducts orchestrally, as opposed to, the musicals that I've done, like Memphis, or even Lady Day, which is jazz, or Altar Boys, or Ain't Too Proud. Any of the shows that I've done, it's more of a pop thing, and you're playing in a group. And of course, I had a click track on a lot of it.
Yes.
But playing in an orchestra related show, many things that you've done, when the conductor comes down, it's not the downbeat. It's somewhere in between there and at where in the top. Now, how do you know when to play? Because we strike as drummers, we strike
Yes,
the instrument, and it creates a sound. When do you strike the instrument? Help me, please.
It's such an excellent question. We could talk for an hour about this. So first of all, Dave Roth and I do How the Grinch Stole Christmas on Broadway together. So I've known Dave for a very, very long time, and I actually subbed for Dave on Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which I believe Kristen Blodgett was the conductor for. That was a show I played both books also. But so Dave and I know each other for many, many years now. This is an amazingly deep question. And orchestrally, if you watch, say, Berlin Philharmonic or Vienna, sometimes you literally, that's where they play. The baton will come down, and up here is where the orchestra will play.
Okay, why is that the
Yeah, so those, and I think with an orchestra like Vienna or Berlin, who have been playing for 300 years together, or 200 to 300 years together, there is a sense, just like you with Memphis or Ain't Too Proud, that groove, that synergy that you guys develop as a band is how an orchestra works as well. And there may be 7 or 8 of you where there are 80 orchestral members. They all feel and interpret exactly the same way. Dave comes from an orchestral background. And I think that show that you were playing, as you stated, is more of an orchestral style, part of that genre where the conducting is not, you're not on a click. You aren't grooving to a feel or a groove that you guys are used to. And so interpreting that beat, yes, that's a good question. And I think it comes with you being in the pit more often, seeing, and you clearly figured it out. You saw that this is not the place to play the note that you're about to play. It could be back up here. And so watching Dave, that's brilliant. Because I've done that many times with, I am seeing something here and I'm hearing something completely different. And I have, on a number of shows, this is about a half a beat ahead. And I have zeroed in on the drummer, where I've been a percussionist. Paul Bazzuti, perfect example, where I literally just watched and listened to him on shows that I've played with him. It is a difference in musical style, what the show musically, stylistically is. And right, orchestral conducting, it's not this boom, that's where it is. Sometimes it comes after the downbeat, or you need to adjust, react in a different way than you would playing a show that is based on groove, more groove-oriented music. It's involved, and even on a show that is groove-related, there are pitfalls everywhere, especially for drummers and especially for sub-drummers.
What should a drummer never do in a Broadway pit?
Things to do: be remarkably prepared. Usually the first week or two of me preparing a book was to transcribe. So you know that books, they change, they develop, and things change over time. You can go watch a show. 6 months from the time you watch that show, the drummer, things have developed and changed a little bit. I always try to get back in to watch if I hadn't been in or haven't played the show in a while, to see what the drummer was doing at the moment in real time. So you start a show a year ago, you haven't been in for a little while, go and watch the show again to make sure that what your memory of what was being done is what's being done now. I used to spend days and days and days transcribing. So with Wicked, the book had developed, and not everything was in the music as it was given to me. So I remember spending a lot of time transcribing exactly the way Gary played his fills. Exactly, if there was something different in the groove, or this said ride cymbal, but he was playing something different. I literally, and I remember Alex Lacamoire calling me in to talk to me about, giving me some notes after the show. And he looked at the book and he went, see, he saw all the whiteout and, all the transcribed stuff. And he went, my God, how much time did you spend on this? I said, I wanted it to be what Gary did, as he's doing it now. And so I would say it's really important. And I know other people have said that you need to make everyone comfortable. The conductor needs to be comfortable, people in the rhythm section, and in the band. So you need to be sensitive to that. So I would say that kind of preparation into playing the show like the regular person. And then if you're there for long periods of time, and even then, be careful. So extreme preparation, what to do with a conductor, and watching a conductor. I know everyone has talked about the conductors want to be looked, have that connection with us, especially as drummers. It's just as important on percussion, but more so a little bit as a drummer. But you can watch a conductor too carefully and too closely. And that has gotten me into some interesting situations where I think the conductor wanted to be able to let go a little bit. You can be too much on a hair trigger with a conductor, and too reactive. And that is the the challenge, the headache at times of being a sub drummer. When you're the regular, you develop that long-term rapport with your conductor. As a sub, you have to come in and at the drop of a hat, be able to do what the regular person does. So while being extremely cognizant of the connection with the conductor, you need to be careful not to make a conductor uncomfortable or nervous, feeling that every little thing they do, you're going to react to. And I'm speaking from personal experience. So I would advise drummers to be thoughtful about that. Showboats, the very famous Gershwin show. It was before we had click track, but there was big Charleston number at the end of the show. And Eric Stern was the conductor on that show too. He had his metronome on his podium and he was looking at the metronome, and I was about 100 miles that way. And he really liked me because I didn't have the click. I was watching the stick. We were really able to lock in because there was choreography on stage, but this is in the days before there was any click track. But so I was literally just following his baton, and he was his stick technique was perfect, but he had his little metronome, and that was it. And the drummers who were not able to do that did not sub that show anymore. So there, it was very specific. Click tracks, there's no question where the time's supposed to be. But when you have a show like Wicked or other shows where it's not always, the click isn't always there, it's a fine line. And it's that tightrope of giving the conductor being connected, but also not making them concerned that every movement they're doing, you're going to react to.
I think that's the key.
Yeah, it's making them comfortable. Absolutely. But you have to play the show a lot. You have to be there a lot. You have to have a continuity. And if you don't have that, it makes it very, very challenging. And I'm not making any excuses for myself. It's just difficult. That's all. And it's what we all do, especially as subs. I mean, that is the challenge. I think the biggest, we all do our work. We learn the books. We know it backwards and forwards. It's once you're in that chair, in that seat, that that interaction is probably one of the most challenging things for anybody. So those are the technical things that I would say please do, and some of the things don't do. Some of the more emotional components and personal components, I know a lot of our colleagues and your guests have spoken about being respectful, obviously. I want to go a step further. You need to be very aware and present in how you are interacting with people in the pit. So I would just say, and I think most people know this, to be cognizant about how you are being perceived by people around you in the pit. Because I've seen subs come in who are great players who it hasn't worked out for other reasons. And I know we've all spoken about getting along with everybody. But, you can come in with just a vibe that rubs somebody the wrong way. And boom, it's just too many, as we've all said, great players, people waiting in line to take that spot. So, be very, very careful, be nice, be congenial. And the last thing that and I've got a great story to illustrate it, is to try to take your ego out of this whole process. We spend days and weeks and preparing not only our own shows, but as subs. It becomes so important that we get some kind of validation when we go in to play. And I know we all experience this. Some of us less or more, but I can speak personally that in the early days, is before computers and emails, I'd wait for that phone call after I subbed, how did I do, and sometimes the phone call never came. Sometimes I got the call to go back in, or I would ask them, I'd call them and say, was the conductor okay with everything? And I was looking for that validation and the thumbs up, you did a great job, blah, blah, blah. That put me in some compromising positions, looking for that. And I would say to people who are coming in now, who are subbing and doing this, to try to take that part of your ego out. Serve the music, serve the project, be grateful that you're there. I know we all are, but sometimes you have to remind yourself how lucky, as you said, you are to even be in the realm that we're in the arena that we're in. Try to just do your best and walk away, and not look for that validation where you need it, so that it affects the way you're doing your job and the way you're playing the show. And I, for many years, would get hurt if I didn't get a call the night that I played the show, and or no news is good news. Like I never got, you were phenomenal, but you're good, you'll stay. I had an experience with a show. It was Newsies, great show to play. It was for Ed Shea, playing percussion, and conductor played the show. Guy just got up, walked out of the pit, and I think we've all experienced this. And I went, you know what? I know that I played the best that I could. There were no mistakes. I did everything that I was expected to do. I'm just going to knock on his door, on his dressing room door, and thank him, and just say, hey, I really appreciate the opportunity to come in and play, work with you, and be a part of the show, instead of how did I do? Or being angry about him walking out of the pit. And I knocked on the door, and he was in there with the trumpet player. And I said, I just really want to thank you for, I appreciate this opportunity. I love playing the show. Music's so much fun. And I'm grateful. Thank you. And he turned to me and he said, you put a lot of work in on this, didn't you? And I said, well, yeah, I mean, I enjoy the music, and I was very committed to doing the job that I did. And he goes, you did a great job. And he turned to the trumpet player, should we designate him? And it was the point where you have to play, 5 shows to be designated, or, so I took something where I would have gone home, and stewed about that he walked out of the pit without saying anything to me. And I turned it into a positive interaction. where I was just let him know I was grateful. And then he was very forthcoming, with letting me know that he thought that I'd done a decent job on the show. If you can try to step back, because we give so much. I mean, I know how you feel about the projects that you do. You're so committed to them and connected to them that sometimes we get too attached, or as you and I were talking about, that being able to let go a little bit. I've heard you speak with Bill Lanham and other people about how do you keep it fresh? How do you keep energy? And for me, it was always gratitude. It's like everything else will come. If you're just grateful for what you have, that'll give you all the motivation to keep it at the highest level with energy, no matter how many times. But yeah, we all get that feeling, I think, after a while, after doing something hundreds of times, that it can become tiring. But you and especially now, it just the number of shows and the number of players that are trying to get those shows is a good motivator to make sure you are at the top of your game all the time.
One of the pitfalls of being a musician is the inconsistencies of employment.
Yes.
How do you navigate around that fact?
Boy, that's the big question. Yeah. Like you, I've been fortunate enough to maintain a living in music my entire life, but it comes at a cost. And the hustling and all of the work that goes into the non-musical, work, all the shedding used to be not an issue for me. As we get older and I certainly feel like I have a lot of credits and experience and wisdom, I'm less patient with hustling. That's a whole, at least 25% of what we do is finding those opportunities. And there's an art to that. And I think we talked about what to do, what not to do when approaching people. So I think we all find our comfort zone. There's some people who are very uncomfortable with searching out and asking for opportunity, and there's some people that it's not a problem at all to do that. I think it's the style and the technique that you have in finding employment in an industry where you have a show one day and it's gone the next day, and what are you going to do? I think being diverse is a huge part of it. So, having teaching, having other things, maybe music copying, maybe programming, maybe recording. There's some guys who do recording, they have studios. So I think being diverse as possible is really helpful. And it's nothing new. I think we all know this, but you do bring up a great question about the tenuousness of what we do financially.
Speaking of, creating your own opportunities, synchronicity music.
Yes.
Tell me more about that. You started this in 1997 with your brother.
I did. It's one of the projects I'm most proud of. We have a very strong video presence of anyone who wants to look up synchronicity piano percussion duo. There's tons of stuff. And we have been so fortunate. First of all, I love working with my brother. We started our relationship when I was 12 years old, playing in bands together. He stayed in New York when I moved to California. We started to work together again when I came back to go to Juilliard. And one of the first concerts, things we did together was at Juilliard for one of the percussion ensemble concerts. But it got him thinking that wouldn't it be great to play as a duo? And he started to write for us. Then we started to do some amazing transcriptions. If anyone's interested in The Rite of Spring, I am now full circle to where I started at the beginning of the interview. My brother and I did a transcription that I think it has about 16,000 hits on it, which actually for a little classical duo is not a bad thing. It's gotten a lot of attention. But we started to transcribe and arrange huge classical things for a duo. which was very unique. We have worked with Paquito de Rivera. We've done some of his original things as well as arrangements. We worked with Robin Eubanks, the great jazz trombonist, who wrote a piece for us as well. We did No Mystery, which is Chick Corea, Return to Forever song. That's up on YouTube. You can hear Robin playing with us on that tune. But I'm very proud of that project. And we have not, the pandemic slowed us down a little bit. We do have some things in the pipeline right now. But yeah, anyone who wants to share that, we've had a lot of Broadway people come to our concerts. The Pit Stop Players, which I mentioned, which is run by Josh Rosenblum, a big musical director on Broadway, has featured us a number of times. We did a piano percussion, a concerto at Domena Center, that's also up on YouTube and on our website. So anyone wants to see anything, synchronicitymusic.com has a lot of our video. YouTube, my Facebook page. If you just search my videos, there are tons of things there. But I play, there's some strictly just drum set fusion things, but predominantly a very large percussion / drum set. I stand when I play drums. So you'll see in the videos, all the drums are in front of the marimba. I have a remote bass drum pedal that attaches to a remote bass drum sort of outside of the marimba. And I do most of the drum set playing standing, while I'm playing marimba, vibraphone, timpani. But Synchronicity is the name of the duo. It's with my brother, Gregory Landes. And a lot of people who will watch this have heard of the duo and or come. I know Ray Marchica. I fondly remember Ray and Nina showing up to one of our concerts at Symphony Space, very supportive and sweet. And a number of other percussionists coming. Joe Mowat, who's married to Lynn Shangle, Dave Roth, have come out to concerts as well. So, yeah.
If you were to talk to some of your students or anyone that sees this, what advice would you give them if they're interested in playing Broadway shows?
I think playing at the highest level, being prepared, and I don't know if this is a good thing. I was called once, and I'm not trying to, it's not ego driven. It was a reaction to the job that I did. I was called the consummate sub, the consummate. So I went, oh, thank you. I think, but I think what the musical director meant is that I was constantly prepared, well prepared, connected and reactive in the most positive way to what the conductor was putting forth. And I think we need to come at it with incredible preparedness, love for what we do. I don't think anyone doesn't love what they're doing, but reminding themselves of why we're doing this, and finding that motivation through the love of the project. And then once you're in the chair, doing all the things we've spoken about, being a good colleague, being careful and thoughtful about the situation that you're in, and just giving everything 1,000% every time you're there. Those would be my words of advice. And I think probably not new words of advice, but that's my perspective of where I'm coming from.
Heisty cymbals. You like the dark energy line?
I do.
Tell me why. Tell me why.
Yeah, well, I was introduced to Peisty way back by the same drummer, Glenn Ryan, who I keep mentioning, had a bunch of them. Also, Bill Lanham on Les Mis. I really like Bill's cymbals, what they sounded like on the show. And I ended up buying a couple for falsettos and just absolutely loving them. So this goes way back, and I didn't get the endorsement until a few years ago. So I've been buying them and playing them for years and years and years and years. John Berger, who I know you've done one of these podcasts with, is a Peisty artist as well. And I think he connected me. So the director is not there anymore. And I was just talking to Bill Hayes, who's also a Peisty endorser, about the gentleman who used to be the liaison, and I can't remember his name. He was really, really good guy. It's a different person now, but Tim Shahady, I think, is also the local guy. I was connected with everybody, and they welcomed me in, and I love the cymbals. I prefer a bright cymbal, and I just find the Paiste have that shimmer to them, and that open, beautiful sound. Yeah, I was using them for a concert that Bill Hayes and I just did. And he came over and he's like, I love these. I had the 13-inch hi-hats, and the dark energy crashes. And yeah, even Bill was like, I love the way these sound. So there's just something about them. The other cymbal lines, I've heard beautiful sounding cymbals from other, from Zildjian and Sabian as well. But I love the Paiste sound. So, there are probably many more of the line that I could experiment with, but the ones that I have right now, I really love.
So why innovative percussion mallets and drumsticks as opposed to ProMark or Vic Firth or
Yeah,
Zildjian?
and that's an excellent question. I love the innovative mallet. So for marimba, vibraphone, I love what they make. Excellent product. That the endorsement scene is also extremely competitive. Innovative opened their doors to me. I was using their equipment and their product already, and gravitate towards their mallet instrument, mallets especially. And I love the product. I only use their mallet instruments, their marimba and vibraphone and bell mallets.
Outside of your Synchronicity music project, what other things are you working on at the moment?
That's an excellent question. So yeah, the big symphonic things, this huge concert that I just did of the John Williams, so orchestrally, I'm still making my rounds there. I just finished a project, as I said, at AMT Theater, which was a wonderful, short, but fantastic project at a great theater. There's another show coming from the same composer. His name is Al Tapper, coming down the road in the fall, that will be back at AMT as well. My teaching will continue on. I have a student who won every audition out here in New Jersey recently. He won all, so the Bergen County, then regions, then the state. I'm very proud of him. So my teaching will continue on with all the wonderful kids that I'm working with. And things are coming in every day that I'm very, very grateful for. I just did a wonderful thing at Alvin Ailey for Penn State. It was all of their up-and-coming drama students. It was for Broadway management and Broadway theater people. So, I'll be doing all of these great things that come down the pike for me that I'm really, really grateful and fortunate to be getting.
Where can people find you on the interwebs?
Yes. So as I was saying, synchronicitymusic.com is fairly up to date with everything we've done. Again, videos with Paquito are up there, and Robin, the double concerto that we did, and my Facebook page, of course. I'm on Instagram as well, but a little more active because of the ability to put up more lengthy things on Facebook, I believe. Everything's up there that anybody needs to see. Clayton, so appreciate your the opportunity to speak with you, your thoughtfulness about what we talked about, and you're leading the conversation in great directions. Thank you so much.